my name is Danielle Isfeld, and I started my master's program just in September, so September 1st. And a lot of this work actually came from some of my summer work, which I did during my undergraduate studies in chemistry and biology. And I work under the direct supervision of Dr. Charette. So we are one of the only labs in the world currently that are looking at a ribosomopathy. It's just a disorder of the ribosome known as Bowen-Conradi Syndrome. And what makes this so incredible for something like Brennan University is that Bowen-Conradi Syndrome is actually found only in Prairie provinces within the Hutterite population, and it's found in a prevalence of about 1 in 355 births is what we're estimating. So what we look at is we're looking at the disordered protein that we know is associated with Bowen-Conradi Syndrome and some of the presentations that we see, which I've actually presented a figure here. So this is a 6-year-old male patient that was diagnosed with Bowen-Conradi Syndrome, and I think very well displays some of the common features that we would associate with Bowen-Conradi Syndrome. So things like joint abnormalities, craniofacial malformations, severe psychomotor delay, microcephaly or the shrinking of the head, and just overall we characterize it as a failure to thrive. So since this is such a new research topic and isn't widely done around the world, we kind of have to start from scratch when we approach this. And so this project specifically was just looking at identifying the protein and how it interacts in various contexts. So to do this, since again, we're a new topic and kind of some new features, we start in yeast. So it's very similar and comparable to human, although of course it would be ideal to get up into the human. We're just not quite there yet, and yeast is nice and simple to work with. I can do a lot of my studies within about 8 months to a year instead of spending those 8 months to a year in ethics. So what I do is I'm able to input this protein, so I can put the wild type, so what you and I might have, and then I can also put in the variant form that we see within Bowen-Conradi Syndrome and force these cells to depend on that protein, and therefore I can see how they behave in different contexts. So what I was doing is I was taking these yeast and I was giving them the yeast version of the protein, but I can also put in the direct human version of the protein. We find that it's compatible. And I was looking at across 17 degrees Celsius, 30 degrees Celsius, which is physiologically relevant to yeast, and 35 degrees Celsius, which is as close as we can get to human physiological relevance in the yeast system. So really what I saw, and of course I can show you during a Western blot, so we're looking for those thick dark bands, shows high prevalence or high abundance of the protein, and the more faint bands show a lower prevalence of the protein across both the human wild type and the human variant. But we're going to skip right ahead to some of the graphs, which are just a little bit easier to look at. So I have highlighted in pink the 30 degrees assay, where we can see that the human form of the protein, highlighted just at the top here, you see much less of a decrease when compared to the 17 degrees or 20 degrees about room temperature. Whereas when we look at the yeast version, we see a very sharp decrease once you hit the 30 degrees, which is interesting that the yeast version of the variant decreases at yeast physiological relevance, whereas we see some form of stability in the human variant version in yeast physiological relevance. However, once we skip down to the closer to human relevance, we see the destabilization of the protein, which we can assume is probably what's leading to some of these clinical manifestations. So this, although I don't have many numbers presented here, I was able to start quantification and start looking at actually what these numbers might look like. And just with protein abundance alone, so not accounting for how this protein interacts with the rest of our system in the cells, I think we found there was about a 20% decrease in protein abundance. So that's, again, not accounting for the functional fidelity of the protein. Just right off the start, your available is 20% less protein, which is probably a problem for an an essential protein, and thus leading to the clinical manifestations that we see in Bowen-Conradi Syndrome.